Morning. Good afternoon, everyone. We are being waiting a little bit until everyone gets connected. Hello, hello. All right. So good afternoon. My name is Angela Ventura. I'm the director of United Way of Broward County's Commission on Behavioral Health and Drug Prevention. First of all, thank you to all of you for your support being here today. Thank you to United Way and to Broward Behavioral Health Coalition for putting together this event. And thank you to Dr. Kevin Sabet and to Cassandra Evans. Cassandra will be moderating the Q&A section. So please, everyone is welcome to write your top questions for Dr. Sabet while he's talking in the Q&A and the comments in the chat. Data from Florida Medical Examiners Commission 2019 show that here in Broward County, there were 41 deaths where cannabinoids were present. And in 18 cases, cannabinoids were the cause of death. It's really sad when we hear parents asking for help because their kids are making wrong choices. We must do whatever it takes to see what's truly going on with this industry. And that's why we are hosting this event today. Dr. Kevin Sabet, an affiliate of the Institution for Social and Policy Studies and the Medical School at Yale University, and dubbed by NBC News as the prodigy of drug politics, author, consultant, and advisor to 3 U.S. presidential administrations. Dr. Sabet has studied, researched, written about, and implemented drug policy for 25 years. He is currently the president and CEO of SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, a nonprofit organization he founded with Congressman Patrick Kennedy and David Frum. His latest book, Smokescreen: What the Marijuana Industry Doesn't Want You to Know, is distributed by Simon & Schuster. He is the only person appointed by Republican and Democrats to work at the White House and White House Drug Office, and he is a columnist for Newsweek. He received his doctorate from Oxford University. So let's welcome Dr. Kevin Sabet.
It's a real pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope you will learn something from this presentation, and I look forward to being in touch with you if you have any questions at the end, of course. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and play a quick video to start us out, and then we will go from there.
This is a book about the newest addiction for profit industry in America, the untold story of big marijuana. I'm bearing witness. I'm testifying to what I've heard from people all across the country. And it's not really about whether legalization is right or wrong, or whether marijuana is even good or bad. It's about the biggest takeover of public health by corporate interests since the advent of big tobacco 100 years ago.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction.
And I think it's time we hear the story. I've been really lucky to have served Presidents Clinton, Bush, Obama, to have debated heads of state, even US presidential candidates on this issue. But nothing could have prepared me for what I learned when I wrote this book. Right around the winter of 2018, I started hearing in succession from people all across the country about their experiences with this industry. People like Sarah talk about her lab that she was so proud of that tested THC content and then falling very, very quickly in the reality of the industry not wanting the accurate tests, rather preferring to pay for tests that they wanted to see to get the results they wanted. Sally is a woman I've known for almost a decade now, I think. And hearing her courage after she lost her son, Andy, who died by suicide. Andy hanged himself on a tree in his backyard and was somebody who had a whole life in front of him. His story is something that I never forget, and his note that he left behind is something I carry around with me almost everywhere I go in this journey. He wrote, "I will only get worse. My soul is already dead. Marijuana killed my soul and ruined my brain." It's something that no parent can imagine having to go through. People like Senator Ron Rice of New Jersey, the head of the Black Caucus there, who worked very hard to delay legalization as much as he could. These are the courageous stories I think that we need to hear.
So I am very excited to share with you issues related to my book, as well as issues related to, obviously related to marijuana generally today. And to be able to do that with you is really a privilege of mine. So I'm going to go ahead and start this up here. So let's talk about marijuana issues. Let's talk about lessons learned. Let's talk about where we go from here with the rapidly changing landscape of this issue. Very quickly, first, the organization I represent, that I'm president and CEO of, SAM, stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And we really have an evidence-based approach to policy that prioritizes public health. We were founded by former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, as well as David Frum and myself. We have a scientific advisory board of the top researchers from around the country and hundreds of thousands of mentions in the news. We work with multiple different organizations, health groups, the AMA, pediatrics, on and on, because this really is not a partisan issue. This is a health and safety issue. And, that is how we deliver our message. As I mentioned, Smokescreen, the proceeds will go to SAM. I'm very excited about the book. It was many years, and I'm going to go through many years coming, and I'm going to go through some of the chapters today and then get into some of the data behind this, which I think you'll find interesting. You can scan your phone to buy it. You can go on the website. There are multiple ways to get it. You can get it at any bookstore. When I first started writing the book, I expected to know kind of a lot because I've been doing this for a long time in this issue, but there were stories that came out at me in ways that I've never seen before or heard of before. For example, and I'm not going to give it all away here, but I'll just sort of give teasers. In the prologue, I talk about a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and not because they were using marijuana, they weren't, but they were exposed to this in ways that I had never even thought of. I never could fathom what happened. And I think often we forget about the non-users because we focus a lot on, should users be arrested or not, or should they be able to do whatever they want, or where could they buy it? But we don't think about the non-users, the people that have to live with the consequences of other people's decisions. And that's what I go through in this book, especially in the prologue. It reminded me of some recent data actually on secondhand smoke that we've been tracking, finding that in public housing, the kids are in an uproar. They don't want to be smelling marijuana everywhere, but they do. And this was a study done by Mount Sinai, and finding that it was much more common to smell marijuana smoke than tobacco smoke. And it even had, quotes of kids that were complaining about it, that were really upset about it and concerned about it. I think that's very interesting. Another part of the book that I think will raise some eyebrows is I was able to get in touch with, and some of them got in touch with me. Some of them were stories that I knew that had gone public or not yet gone public, with people that really were in the depths of this industry. And fast forwarding to now, 8 years after Colorado or so legalized marijuana, 9 years, almost a decade now, basically people that had regrets, that were in the industry, that basically said, this is not why I got involved with marijuana and the industry, and what it's turned into is not something I agree with, which takes a lot of courage actually to be able to admit those mistakes. And when you look at the data, and I'll show more data, but when you look at the data on the increases in calls made to poison control centers, for example, and the emergency room admissions we're seeing, none of that is all terribly surprising. What was very surprising, and actually the whole book in a sense is centered around a group of what I call whistleblowers, people that really have no reason or interest to speak up other than their own conscience, because they lived, they were part of the regulatory sort of apparatus in different states. They saw what was happening. They were in charge of what was happening in some cases. They were, they own laboratories. You heard me talk about Sarah earlier, and now they want to really tell their story. And I think that's pretty interesting. I go through this, and it's a lot about this myth of regulation that we hear about, because we're unfortunately seeing that states are failing to regulate pesticide use, that there's contaminated marijuana out there, that a lot of what's in the marijuana, even the legal marijuana, is not what you would expect. And so I think this is a huge part of it, that we actually had people come forward to say, yeah, let me tell my story for the first time. I also talk a lot about industry capture, and the fact that when you look at who's in charge of selling marijuana now, and you look at the industries involved, they're not really industries that we trust. They are the tobacco industries, the alcohol industries, in some cases pharmaceuticals. They're not really ones that where their story has ended well for America, and yet we are seeing the picture being repeated all over again. The movie being repeated all over, if you put it that way. Actually, on our website, we go into detail in some of these about some of these corporate giants, and you can click on any of these on our website and find out more about them. But you've no doubt heard about how big tobacco has made huge investments in big marijuana, and it's not so much that they're competing with big marijuana; they're part of big marijuana. All of these companies that have done this, and alcohol isn't immune to it either. We've seen, huge increases in the alcohol industry, pushing this really as far as they can to make money. And this is the issue of what I call addiction for profit. And the marijuana industry, that is what's going on. We basically know that 30%, so if you take 22 and 8, 30% of users consume 87% of all of the marijuana today. And or if you look at it the other way, 22%, 1 in 5 people consume 2 out of 3 of all the marijuana that's out there. That's pretty incredible. It means that a small number of people are responsible for the heavy use, and the heavy use is what sells. And my worry is that we are essentially, incentivizing heavy use. Another thing which I think is very important to talk about is this issue of social justice, and this idea that somehow by opening up the door to marijuana, we're going to be helping social justice. Well, I have stories of people in here that say the opposite, of community organizers in places like Compton, California, that have organized against marijuana dispensaries. They don't want to see this happening, because they know that if you treat it like alcohol, which is what people, often say we should be doing, then there are double the amount of arrests for alcohol in this country than for marijuana. 1.3 million people were arrested in 2017, which is the last year we have data for. That includes all the alcohol-related non-violent crimes. Compare that to the marijuana-related arrests that are out there. So, this is obviously something that, we're still seeing people enter the criminal justice system through alcohol. The idea that if we treated it like alcohol, that would go away, I think is pretty ludicrous. And we've seen disproportionate arrest rates that are still happening in places like Colorado. We have not seen the prison population go down because of marijuana being legal at all, because they weren't in prison for marijuana. We've seen public use and different levels of different kinds of marijuana arrests go up in these states, and I am very concerned about that. And frankly, we're not seeing Black people or other people of color making money off of this. The people that are making money look a lot more like me than they do anybody else. They're usually white men with, good backgrounds in terms of education and money. They have connections. They are able to do this. And the programs that are supposed to help people of color are failing miserably. And you can look at places like Illinois where that's happened. Pew just reported a big article on this, that, Black-owned businesses remain very, very rare. It's about 4% actually. So this is not happening in a way that is helping people of color. In fact, when you look at where the pot shops are concentrated in places like Denver, they are concentrated in neighborhoods of color. And I think that's very, very concerning because it's similar to what, alcohol has done and then the liquor industry has done in terms of, pushing this. And I worry about that. I was also able to get in contact, believe it or not, with the marijuana underground, I'll call them, with drug dealers, essentially, who told me that legalization was helping their business, not hurting their business. And again, I won't tell you exactly how, because I want you to check the book out, but this idea that the drug dealers or the cartels will go away makes no sense. In California and other legal states, the illegal pot market is booming. As the New York Times has said, despite legalization, I might say because of legalization, it's booming, even though the conventional wisdom is that it should be despite legalization, but that's not the case because, first of all, drug cartels are involved in multiple different enterprises. Marijuana is not the majority of what they account for. They are, making money with other ways. We've seen what the underground cigarette business is like. It's a $500 billion at least business around the world. This is a huge illegal market for a legal product like tobacco and like cigarettes. It generates money for terrorist groups. And we also know that drug dealers can undercut the legal price, right? So if you are a state and you're taxing it, when you're a drug dealer, you don't pay taxes, you can undercut that legal price and still make a very handsome profit. And that's what's happening in places like Oregon. It's a minority of all the marijuana that's sold legally. So I think that's something that we have to look at. The other thing that made some news with this book is I discussed some of my time in the Obama administration, the accounts of basically, how we talked about this issue, how we thought about this issue. Was something that I really, for the first time put pen to paper on, because I've kind of kept it in my head and not really talked to many people about it, but I thought it was finally time to talk about it and kind of what we went through while policy was changing around us, in the state level and in other places. I think was pretty interesting. And if you're into that stuff, kind of wonky stuff, but it was pretty interesting politically. So you can get the book at smokescreenbook.com, and I hope you do. But obviously, look, there are three separate issues that often get conflated. Then I think this is a very key point that we need to talk about. The issue of penalizing users, decriminalization, the issue of medicinal use of marijuana, whether the proper medicinal use or the improper medicinal use, and also the legalization for any use, which is really what is often talked about. And why this matters, folks, is that the percentage of past users who consume daily or near daily has skyrocketed in this country. Blue is marijuana, red is alcohol. They used to be similar. Now it's a huge ratio, a huge gap between marijuana and alcohol. There is a greater number of people who use marijuana who are using on a regular basis. And I think that's a worry that we have, because it's not just about the occasional user, it's about the regular user. In fact, now we have 10 times as many daily users than we did in, like 1992. And I think that's very, very worrisome. And that's why we've partnered with civil rights organizations and other groups to push back on this. Because I think people don't have the right idea about what marijuana is. They have an old view of marijuana. They have a view that it's that it's a joint. They don't have a view that it's actually, something that's much more harmful in terms of the edibles, the gummies, the Pot Tarts, the lollipops, the products that we're seeing in the vaporizers, the blow torches, all of these candies that look like, regular candy you buy at the store. All of this has translated into a massive jump in potency of marijuana, the plant potency and concentrate potency. In fact, now we can have up to 99% THC, these derivatives of marijuana. And that is very, very worrisome. I think that's something we really need to be looking at. It's why the former Surgeon General has said this isn't your mother's marijuana. The marijuana of today is significantly more potent, and he put out an awareness of that. But also the Surgeon General under Obama and now Biden, Vivek Murthy, said essentially the same thing, that marijuana is in fact addictive. It may come as a surprise. Public policy is outpacing the science, and it's policy that's legalizing marijuana is not where the science is. And I think the Surgeon General, the current Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, makes a lot of sense. And it shows, again, this issue is not a partisan issue. It should not be that. It should be a health and safety issue. So let's talk about some of the research highlights that are out there. First of all, it's really important to remember that we have what we call cannabinoid receptors located throughout the brain and your body, and the rest of your body, that regulate a host of brain activity: coordination, vision, sensations, movement, judgment, reward, and memory. And so that means that when you ingest THC, it is binding to these receptors, and you're getting an effect that affect these parts of the brain. I should mention the sort of addiction center of the brain is reward and memory, because if you think about it, addiction is essentially something that you really, makes you feel really good. That's why you want to keep doing it. You remember you want to do it, and you want to do it again. And so it's reward and memory. It's that central part of the brain that's working when it comes to addiction. And a study that just came out in March of 2021 by Nora Volkow and some colleagues found that the prevalence of people with an addiction among teens, from the time they started using, was double for marijuana than it was for cigarettes or alcohol. And that really was the case if you used less than 12 months, if you used 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, more than 3 years. Marijuana was number one. That's a striking finding. It's something we really have to understand and look at when people say that marijuana is not addictive. We have a lot of data showing that's not the case. But this is pretty incredible. In fact, among another population, past users using NISDA data, Debbie Hassan and her colleagues found that it was 1 in 3 past users who had a cannabis use addiction, a cannabis use disorder, which is an addiction. And that's a 30% rate. So sometimes we hear about 15%, 16%. Well, this actually says it's a 30% rate, which is pretty incredible. And it's really reversing, overall youth are drinking less, they're smoking less, they're actually using fewer opioids than in the past, when you're among youth. But marijuana legalization, according to many articles, including, all this one in a peer-reviewed journal, shows that by legalizing marijuana, we're reversing the downward trend in youth use. And, it's really, really interesting. Their quote, it said, among teens, non-medical marijuana legalization, so basically marijuana legalization, may be working against hard-won population level decreases in the prevalence of marijuana and alcohol use. So legalization is working against these hard-won decreases. And when you look at the data, like Monitoring the Future, you see that daily marijuana use is up among 12th graders and is more than double the rate of daily cigarette and daily alcohol use. Maybe that's why we see that addiction level that Nora showed be so high. And this has just been on a steady increase. It was 5.8, 6.4, it's now 6.9. We have other studies showing the prevalence of marijuana use disorder increased by 25% among kids in legalized states. And then we've, of course, seen that the vaping issue, which I will talk about more, has been increasing. So we're just seeing these increases across the board in ways that are troubling. Nevada, yearly youth marijuana use; California, yearly youth marijuana use; Oregon, yearly youth marijuana use. All of these numbers are going in the wrong direction. And these are all states that have legalized. So I am extremely worried about it. And in fact, Monitoring the Future a couple of years ago found that 1 in 4 high school seniors said they would try marijuana or use it more, increase their use if marijuana was legalized. So why should we care about this? Why should we care about increased use? We should care about increased use because of the data we have across the board when it comes to many different health outcomes. Probably one of the most worrying health outcomes, I think, can be in the category of mental illness. When you look at the studies being done in England, like this one and other studies, we're seeing that regular high potency marijuana users were 5 times more likely to develop psychosis. And those were the high potency marijuana. They call it skunk in England. Frankly, their high potency marijuana is becoming our average potency here in the United States. So, it's interesting how we might define that. But even if you use what they call lower potency, you still had 3 times more likely to develop psychosis. So you're not out of the woods, even with lower potency. We've had recent studies in JAMA Psychiatry show twice as likely to develop anxiety disorders if you're an adolescent using high potent marijuana. We've long had studies showing reductions in high school completion, university entrance scores, and of course a famous IQ study by Madeline Meyer showing that if you use 3 to 4 times for 3 to 4 years, you had a chance to have an 8-point reduction in IQ, a significant chance for that to happen. So I worry about that. I worry about other vulnerable populations like veterans. Veterans are being sold a false bill of goods. When a recent review by Turna and McKillop this year in 2021 in clinical psychology, it was called Cannabis Use Among Military Veterans, a Great Deal to Gain or Lose. They found, after looking at 500 studies, that marijuana use among vets was associated with other substance abuse, so they were more likely to use other drugs, developing of and worsening of psychiatric disorders, and self-harm and suicidality. We've seen other studies, by the way, about self-harm and suicidality too. So I'm very worried. They also said that there have been very few studies about medical cannabis, and those that we have are very bad quality. So they did this idea that this is going to be good for you. Those studies are on very shaky ground. And lo and behold, another study finding that marijuana abuse by youth with mood disorders is linked to suicide attempts, self-harm, and death. Folks, this is not your old marijuana that would just, make you high and you fall asleep in bed. The regular use, especially among youth, is having a profound impact. And it's having an impact on our opioid problem. There's been this myth that if we, legalize marijuana, that we would be seeing reductions in opioids. Well, actually, when those studies have been done and redone, they found the opposite. In fact, medical marijuana increased with 23% increase in opioid deaths. Probably it's a spurious association, but the bottom line is it doesn't reduce opioids. Another article in JAMA Internal Medicine, the opioid crisis appears to be worsening where marijuana has been legalized. Folks, drugs go hand in hand. It's called polysubstance abuse. This idea that it's done, one or the other as a substitute, maybe for some people, but on a population level, that's not usually how it goes, especially among problematic users. We're seeing, opioid related fatalities aren't going down in Colorado, they're going up. We're seeing other studies, medical marijuana legalization appears to be associated with increases in opioid use. A study from October of 2020 finding you had double the risk of opioid use when you used marijuana and that there was not substitution. So, these are major, major studies. This is a study in addiction journal. These are not, working papers by a master's degree student. With all due respect, I was a master's degree student at some point, but these are seasoned scientists finding these outcomes, controlling for other things. If you don't believe the American research, believe the Canadian research. McMaster University, marijuana did not reduce opioid use, and it didn't lead to people staying in treatment programs. It was the opposite. So, again, we're just seeing study after study. Again, another study showing you used more opioids when you were in the hospital if you were a marijuana user. And by the way, you had more pain if you were a marijuana user, which is really interesting. It didn't reduce those levels of pain. You needed more anesthesia. This kind of stuff is very, very important to understand that this is happening. And unfortunately, all the rhetoric that's saying the opposite is absolutely targeting our youth. So we have seen the coupons, we have seen the billboards, we have seen, the promoting fun and appealing to youth. We've seen Joe Camel returning, it's incredible. This is a billboard on the California highway, which, by the way, we helped sue that and we won to get those billboards off the highway. But this was there, and finding that, Joe Camel was there, and essentially the reincarnation of Joe Camel, I think, as Lynn Silver showed us. And we're seeing the THC vaping companies, for example, advertising on social media with cartoon characters. This is targeted right at Comic-Con. This is what's happening. One most potent cartridge, and this is being advertised, during events where young people are at. And again, that's because the end game here, folks, is heavy use. And you only, by the way, get heavy use if you start when you're young. We're talking, the average use here, 10 drinks a day, which only 10% of the population drinks, make up 75% of the alcohol industry sales. That is really, really important to understand. This is something that is not just about occasional users. This is about heavy users. It goes back to this slide that I showed earlier about heavy use and how we rely on heavy use. And folks, this heavy use is having not only individual impacts, but it's having a public health impact. The Department of Health in Colorado reporting a 400% increase in poisonings among children 0 to 9. Over 20,000 homes with kids living in those homes where marijuana is not stored properly. Over 30,000 homes where kids are exposed to secondhand marijuana smoke. This is going to have consequences. We're going to have to pay the Pied Piper on this one, folks. It just doesn't just go away. The number of kids, the rate of children 5 and younger exposed to marijuana increasing. Those living near marijuana dispensaries increasing the likelihood of youth use and favorable opinions. Marijuana hospitalizations surging in Colorado and Alaska and other states. And of course, this coincides with the vaping crisis that some people have forgotten about because obviously the global pandemic that occurred. But, you know, the tobacco industry is now involved and has always been involved in the vaping industry. You know, you should look at the head of the American Vaping Association and what he has to say about what we do. You would understand that they were actually and are part of the marijuana industry. They see this as a huge win for them. And you know, PAX, which was started, is now explicitly a THC vaporizer company, and Juul spun off of PAX. And we've been paying the consequences. We've had 1 in 6 cases of marijuana vaping crises of the Valley illness attributed to products sold in commercial shops. And, you know, you got to think about at some level, you know, is it worth it? You know, how is this worth it? And is this worth it? Well, it's not worth it from a tax revenue perspective. We essentially are promised billions and billions of dollars. And the reality is it's pennies compared to that. It's such a small percentage of the overall budget. And when you look at the tax revenue, and we shouldn't be surprised, because what's the get from alcohol and tobacco? It's basically for every dollar in alcohol and tobacco tax, it's cost society over $10 to $15. So this is even before the costs. We have to count the costs, though. That's really important. And when we count the costs, like driving issues, because we know that marijuana, when you legalize marijuana, when you open the door, you have increases in fatalities where the driver tested positive, and increased where they tested positive recently, not just, you know, from a month ago. That's a huge cost that we really need to understand. That's why AAA opposes the legalization of marijuana for recreational use, because of these inherent traffic safety risks and, frankly, the difficulty in writing legislation. We're never going to get to a 0.08 level like we do for alcohol. It's not going to happen for marijuana. It just isn't. And so we need to understand that that's the case, and it's going to be very difficult to detect impairment. We have seen driving fatalities, by the way, in legal states skyrocketing, more than doubling since legalization in Washington State and Colorado. In Oregon, 50% of all drivers assessed tested positive for marijuana impairment after legalization. Now 1 in 5 drivers in Washington are stoned. That's up from 1 in 10. 2/3 of respondents to a survey found that they said driving didn't impair their ability to drive. Marijuana didn't impair their ability to drive, even though it did. Folks, these are really important to understand the implications that's happening. In fact, Russ Kamer did a study that was published in JAMA Internal Medicine, finding that federal legalization would bring 7,000 more stoned driving deaths nationally to our country. There was another study that corroborated those findings. You know, one sort of serious injury costs about $1 million to society. So imagine 7,000 times probably $1.5 million to 2 million if you're talking about death. This isn't something that is trivial in terms of the cost. It's something that we have to count. Now, you might be thinking, you know, about legalization. Listen, this is happening, and what can you do about it? You know, I don't have a crystal ball about what's happening for policy. So before you ask that, I will tell you, though, that when voters say they support legalization, the Washington Post reported on a poll that Emerson College did, essentially finding that if you give people choices, they actually choose other policies over legalization, whether it's decrim, medical, prohibition. This idea that it's legal, when you just ask someone a binary question, legal or not, that's not the same thing as essentially giving them choices. And I think that's really interesting, because I think when a lot of people say legalization, they really mean they want to remove criminal penalties. They want to remove people going, getting arrested for marijuana. And look, we want to do that too. I think there's been a false dichotomy that you either have to arrest somebody or you have to legalize. And we know that that is a false dichotomy. We know that actually there are many other things you could do that remove criminal penalties, that emphasize prevention, that emphasize awareness, that emphasize treatment. There are so many people that are not treated for marijuana that need it. So that's more difficult to do, and it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker like legalization does. But to me, that's going to be a lot better. So we're watching some legislation right now. Some of the legislation includes the Safe Banking Act, the MORE Act, and the States Act. We'll start off with the MORE Act. The MORE Act fully legalizes marijuana at the federal level by removing it from the Controlled Substances Act. What's interesting is that a lot of people would say, no, that's decriminalization. That's not legalization. The reality is when you remove it, that is legalization, period. It gives marijuana businesses and corporate holding companies full access to institutional investors and capital markets, including Altria, Philip Morris. It allows marijuana businesses to access loans from the SBA, and it allows marijuana businesses to deduct the cost of advertising, which is not what you want to do. You do not want to incentivize companies to advertise more. And let me tell you, they're advertising enough. You don't want to give them a tax break to do it. So this is just really, really legalization by another name. There's also the Safe Banking Act, which has passed the House a couple times. Essentially, it allows financial institutions access to the banking infrastructure and the financial system in our country, setting a very dangerous precedent to allow banking access for a Schedule I drug. Why banking access is that and I'll just stop sharing for a minute, is that, we hear a lot from folks that, oh, well, we need banking access because otherwise we're just dealing with, we're just dealing with cash, and we don't want to just have cash around because essentially that's going to give us we're going to be a target for robbery, and we need to be able to use the financial system so we can use credit cards. And that's really what they said. They're basically saying it because they want to use credit cards. And so we actually did an undercover investigation of our own, where we had somebody go into multiple different pot shops in Colorado and ask if they took credit card or not. These were the biggest pot shops in the state. And because we knew they were taking credit cards, we just wanted to get some proof. So I'm going to show you that proof right now. I'm excited to show that here. Let me actually do this so you make sure you can hear it. But I think this is really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, how you doing, brother? Real quick, do you guys take card here? You do? Okay. Do are you part of this or?
Yeah, the dispensary?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know if they take credit card here?
They do.
They do?
Over
Okay.
$30, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah. Give me 1 second.
Hey, do you work here? Do you know if they take a credit card?
They do.
They do? Okay. Serious, we are working on it. Oh. Hey, do you guys accept card here?
We accept Visa debit.
Okay.
Not credit though.
Okay. Hold on a second. Give me 1 second, dude. Seriously.
Hey, brother, do you guys take card here? Yes. You do? Okay.
Well, I think that answers that question. One of them said they only take Visa debit, but the rest of them took credit. I mean, it's just incredible, the lies, I got to just say, that the industry loves to perpetuate. And that's what we're seeing. So they want to pass safe banking. They also want to pass the States Act, which would amend the Controlled Substances Act and give states rights. It would give corporate holding companies access to institutional investment. It would not address social justice issues at all. This was another, but this one is less in favor now than the MORE Act and, of course, the Banking Act. So listen, what are the policy solutions? Well, we know President Biden is not in favor of legalization. What are some things we can do to be proactive? If you're in a state that's legalized marijuana, which obviously many of you are. Edibles and THC concentrates can be outlawed or severely restricted. You can limit the potency of these things, folks. We're doing it in different states right now. We've seen a movement in Colorado among moms, who, by the way, all happen to be Democrats. This is not a partisan issue, as I've mentioned, who are pushing for potency limits. We've seen this in Vermont happen. We've seen it in other places. So this can happen. We should not allow the marijuana industry to serve on rulemaking bodies to determine regulations. I think that is, we should not allow them to self-regulate like that. There's no need for them to do that. Pot advertising and promotions should absolutely be prohibited. It's very hard to prohibit that under the First Amendment. This is why we don't want legalization in the first place. But if we do have it, we have to challenge it, like we did in California with billboards. We challenge that. A science-based public awareness campaign. We need to raise awareness. Listen, our work doesn't go away if marijuana is legal, illegal, whatever it is. It just gets harder or easier, right? So now it's getting harder with legalization. We have to do more on prevention and awareness. And we absolutely have to keep drug driving a priority. In states that have not legalized, listen, we can remove criminal penalties and arrest records for personal possession. Let's see how that works. But let's, of course, try and discourage marijuana. People caught repeatedly should be directed to interventions and treatment. And we still need a scientific campaign and drug driving prevention. If you're interested in learning a lot more about what has gone on in each state that's legalized, probably our seminal publication is Lessons Learned from State Marijuana Legalization, where we actually have gone through the data that's out there, and we've collated it all for you. We found it all the original sources. You can use that. This is normally would be I think $1 million publication from any think tank. It's yours for free. Check it out. It's on our website. Again, scan the book, smokescreenbook.com. If you're interested, would really appreciate the support. And of course, our website at learnaboutsam.org, which I will take you through. I just wanted to take you through for a minute because I think it would be neat for you to see some of the things that we are, that we are promoting here. Obviously, this was the Banking Act. Here, let's go. We got to share the screen again. There we go. So yeah, this was the banking thing, but we have all kinds of facts and resources. We have a toolkit here where, will marijuana solve the opioid epidemic? We have new one-pagers about all kinds of issues here regarding marijuana. And I mean, it's just on and on and on. We have research studies. So if you click here, you can actually search for the research that you want to see. There's a lot of research studies here. You can go to marijuana recovery, where we talk about the recovery issues. We did a lot for National Recovery Month, where you hear different people's stories and how to raise awareness, which I think is pretty awesome. We have a local control resource center. So if you are in a locality, whether it's legal or not, but especially if it's legal or is considering legal, you can download our updated toolkit. And in that toolkit, it tells you what you can do on the local level. So there's a lot. There's the marijuana laws map. If you just want to check what the laws are in your state and what's happening, you're able to do that. Oops, I zoomed in a bit. You're able to do that here, which is very helpful. That's constantly being updated. And of course, on our homepage, we have all kinds of things, what we stand for, our mission and vision, a whole thing on marijuana victims, which we are very, very, we want to raise awareness of these victims. They need to be raised up, and we have all kinds of stories here that can be taught that you can learn about when you go to our website. So there's a ton. I mean, we'd love for you to be a supporter. We'd love for you to read our report. We'd love for you to follow the money. If you want to find out where your representative, where your candidate stands on big money, you can do that. And of course, all of our latest studies are here on our news. So again, I want to thank you all for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I wanted to make sure to leave some time for questions, but again, thank you for having me. And you can always email me at info@learnaboutsam.org. I see all of those emails. We'll get right back to you. Thank you so much. And now we will move into our Q&A. Thanks a lot.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Dr. Sabet, for that comprehensive and inclusive overview of what's taking place in the world of marijuana. And so we've got a variety of questions coming in via the chat and those that come in earlier. But I really want to hit you with some of the harder questions, because we can certainly reference the your website and probably glean a lot of information from that. So first of all, let's start off with a little bit of data. So some of your slides go back, 4 or 5 years. Are there any new data trends that are happening that we should be aware of that will help contextualize the urgency in which we hear this matter being presented?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the data is often lagging. I mean, if you look at the death data, for example, we have in this country, it's behind a few years. So where you don't see data up until about 2019, because realistically, we're in mid-21, 19 is the latest data we're going to be able to get. The COVID pandemic, by the way, made this much worse. The recent NISDA results were released last week, and basically they're more or less incomparable with previous years. It's just really tough. So where the data doesn't go to 19, it means we don't have latest data, because we continuously update this, because obviously that's very important. Okay. So yeah.
All right, thank you for that. So
sure.
In your presentation, you mentioned about not having a crystal ball. But being an expert at this level certainly gives you the, I'm sure, the capability of forecasting what you see coming down the road. So could you speak to us about the trajectory that you see us going in as a country at this pace? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, the problem is we are going very quickly down the path of legalization. And I feel like, we're down the path of commercialization and acceptance. And so I think what we need to understand is that whether the laws change now or in 10 years, or whether federal law gets changed or never gets changed, one thing we have to understand is that we're kind of in this era of acceptance, like we were with tobacco in the 1950s. And so we have to understand that that's very real. And we have to understand that often in our discussions with folks, we have to meet people where they're at. Not everybody believes marijuana is harmful. In fact, most people don't. So rather than just kind of hit people on the head with something that they're never going to believe, we have to maybe start out slower in our discussions. But we're going to be down a path of acceptance. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And I feel that we really have to often meet people where they're at in our discussions with them about this issue.
All right, thank you for that. So part of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, part of the commercialization and acceptance, I'm going to lay at the feet of social media, right? And so if you could speak to us about, has mainstream media taken a stance on this issue? They're so influential on so many matters. Kind of how do you see us using that platform as a way to address this matter?
Yeah, well, some platforms are better than others. I mean, Facebook has disallowed the marijuana advertising, which is good. Unfortunately, I think Twitter allows more than it should. Instagram. The problem is you have these influencers. So they're not necessarily companies, but they're people sponsored by companies. It's very hard to ban them. And so there's a ton of pro-drug content on these. And whether we're talking about marijuana or other drugs, I mean, there's a ton of that content on these platforms. So that's unfortunate. You also have sort of edgy media companies like Vice and others that really are embracing the marijuana sort of moment that they're having. So media can be very tough, but we have to try and use media for the better. So we've just started a TikTok account at SAM, where we have, not me, but people a lot younger than me running it, talking about issues in a way that hopefully young people are understanding. So if we can utilize social media for good, we can. But I also think that it's been, unfortunately, there are a lot of influencers that are not using it for good.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think that, again, the social media is such a viable option for us to try and use in a positive way. So I'm kind of along those same lines. Again, something that resonated in the presentation and folks actually asked questions about it, the obvious, follow the money. You said it, right? You talked about the industry capture. You talked about the end game. Today's problems were yesterday's solutions. So in the tobacco industry, we see how that turned out from the 1950s and where we are today.
Yes.
Right? So tell me, is there, besides the money, is there something really beneath this that we should be aware of? Are there other people involved that we just don't know about and they're kind of flying beneath the radar?
Well, there's this movement started with basically a few billionaires, as I talk about in my book, about 20 years ago. But it's moved on from that. It's now these industries and these companies that are involved in this industry, and they are pumping in a ton of money along with big tobacco, big alcohol. So we have to understand we're up against those very, very big forces. But I just never underestimate the power of citizens, especially parents, to push back on that. So I encourage you to do that. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely follow the money, look at who's benefiting from these policies. And they're using some very persuasive lines of thought for us to agree with them. I'm seeing a few Q&A along that in the chat box. If you don't mind, I'll just address very quickly. That's okay. There is this idea, and this was in a few of the questions, that if we regulated drugs, whether they're marijuana or anything else, but let's just use marijuana, that we would at least know what's in it, and there would be quality and safety. We wouldn't have something laced with fentanyl, etc. The problem is, first of all, we're not seeing a ton of marijuana laced with fentanyl. I mean, that may be happening here and there. Even then, there's a big dispute about it. Could it be laced with other things? Maybe. That's not an actually extremely common problem. A lot of people mistake today's marijuana with marijuana laced with something because it has psychotic effects on some people because the THC levels are so high. We have to sometimes, even with toxicology reports, convince parents, no, your kid only took marijuana. They only took THC. There was nothing laced. And it's hard for parents to understand because they remember the marijuana of yesteryear and they think it's no big deal. So we have to understand that. The problem with this idea that we could regulate it, I wish we could too, frankly. But if you read the book, actually, I mean, I talk with the regulators, I talk with people who were supposed to, the lab owners who were supposed to actually regulate what's in it. And the whole game is rigged. These labs are paid off for results by companies. There's no regulation. And you could say, well, maybe the regulation could get better. There's no evidence that it could. It's never gotten better in any of these states. States aren't equipped to regulate. I mean, states don't have their own FDA. They don't have their own FDA certified labs. And if you legalize nationally, there's no guarantee you would have that either. And so I wish we could regulate for quality and potency. And again, if you're in a state that's legalized, certainly I say at the very least, you should, limit the potency of this. Obviously, Florida does not have recreational, but other states do. So we do argue to limit the THC content. But even when we do that, it's first of all, it's very difficult to enforce because you can't really test all the products. But number two, these industries, the minute we pass a THC cap, they turn around and advocate for no cap. They say, well, we don't want a cap because if we have a cap on our THC quality, people are going to go to the black market for what they want. They're already going to the black market for what they want. It's not because the government can't provide the THC content. So it's a fallacy that we can regulate this effectively. We've never regulated things that well. Look at the opioid epidemic. These were legal pain medications meant to be used in hospital settings that went haywire, even though we were supposed to be regulating it through doctors, which are the most respected, members of the community. We couldn't even regulate it. So I wish we could regulate it. I wish we could test for quality. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. What does happen is the mass commercialization.
Understood. And that is certainly a mouthful. And that's, I think, just philosophically hard to grapple with, right?
Yeah,
so
it is.
For you to answer some of those questions in the chat box leads me to and I don't want to put you on the spot to say either or.
No, you can.
Are we truly on the tipping point of a slippery slope, or are we already in the rabbit hole on this?
Well, we're in the rabbit hole when it comes to the acceptance of marijuana, when it comes to the acceptance of this. I mean, it's very, now I think we can get out, but it may take some time. I mean, things are cyclical, as we're learning in politics, right? These things are cyclical too. All of our drug epidemics in the past, there was a time when we had acceptance of all drugs in this country about 100 years ago, 120 years ago. We accepted cocaine to be used by athletes. We accepted versions of amphetamines. We certainly accepted opioids. In fact, we used opium for babies in England 150 years ago. Certainly marijuana was accepted. Interestingly enough, Mexico banned marijuana before we did, because they saw the harm that was coming from it. And that was from very low THC marijuana. I mean, nothing like today. So, I think these things are in cycles. So I just say we don't give up hope. We have to keep pushing where the science is. And the science is very clear. I mean, you basically can stand with the medical groups and the scientists, or you can, stand with ideology, which is fine. But the science has been pretty clear on the harms and why we should be preventing as opposed to promoting.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to pick up on that last piece. Who do you stand with, right?
Yeah.
I have to imagine that you've gotten some pushback, some
Yes.
adversaries in this
Yes.
world. And
Yes.
so kind of what has that attack look like? And then again, because I anticipate Broward County being an action-oriented county, what can we anticipate in those pushback and attacks?
Well, let me tell you, marijuana is a religion for some people. So when you attack somebody's religion, they get very defensive and they don't like it. The only question I've ever stumped the head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse with was a question about why some marijuana advocates are such zealots, and yet we don't see zealotry among alcoholics, among heroin addicts, among methamphetamine addicts. We don't see people protesting for their right to use heroin. There's something about marijuana, I don't know what it is exactly, but it elicits a visceral response. And so you can expect to be attacked. You can expect to be followed. You can expect to be some of these really negative things happening. Obviously that's happened to us. Although let me tell you something, for every bad email I get, I probably get 3 emails from parents, doctors, or counselors saying, thank you, saw your op-ed, thank you for what you're doing. We need to stand up for what's right. It's amazing how much support there actually is. And sometimes it's silent support. People are afraid to talk about this issue. So it's really tough. And I see, should I go ahead and just kind of address some of these other, because I love talking, with people that I disagree with. It makes us smarter. It challenges us. Do you mind if I do that?
Absolutely. I was going to go to some of those questions in the chat.
Great.
Go ahead.
So there was one about, what about people that say marijuana reduces anxiety, makes you kind of relax? And certainly we hear that. It's not that is not heard of. That is heard of a lot, actually, especially among young people and others. The science is pretty clear, though, about the medium to long-term effects. So something may help you in the short term, like you feel better. But when you look at medium and long-term effects, things aren't as rosy. In fact, I worry about PTSD and marijuana being used for PTSD. It may relax you for a bit, not give you those night terrors you might be having. But then in the long term, it's going to make things worse. That's what the science says. I mean, again, if you look at the research out of New Zealand, out of England, especially London, out of Australia, also here in the US, it's very clear that when you talk about medium and long-term anxiety, depression, psychosis, schizophrenia, these kinds of things are extremely connected and correlated with marijuana use. So short term may feel great, long term, it's really not. It's not good at all. In fact, it's a lot worse than some of the other drugs that are bad in other ways. But for mental illness, I would say it's hard to find a worse thing for you than 99% THC or very high potent marijuana THC.
So going to that, so along those same lines, about if you could help us understand, or just refresh us on the potency piece of it, and then any cross comparison to synthetic marijuana.
Yes, yeah. Synthetic marijuana it shouldn't be called marijuana because it is so different. It is a totally different chemical structure. So when people, that's the name of it, I know, and it's just like people, some things you can't change, but so there isn't a lot to compare. It's a totally different chemical structure. Obviously, the synthetics like the K2s and these are extremely harmful. I mean, these are created in a laboratory. They can be, the effects are completely unpredictable. So it's very different than with some of the other drugs. So, stay away. I think the harms of synthetic marijuana are bad. We don't have a ton of research on the long-term harms because usually people stop taking it after a certain point. It's not like with marijuana where people think it's great and they take it and then 5 years later they're having a schizophrenic break, psychotic break. which is absolutely what we're seeing with today's marijuana. With synthetic, they often stop at some point because it's just so unpredictable and damaging. By the way, the comparison to cigarettes someone asked about is really interesting. So, tobacco and cigarettes are one of the deadliest things known to man. I mean, cigarettes have killed more people than any war we've ever had, etc. There's two lessons there, though. Why did cigarettes get so harmful? Remember, tobacco did not kill people forever. We've been using tobacco for a long time. When did it get deadly? It got deadly when we allowed an industry, just like we are with marijuana. It got deadly when we allowed the tobacco industry to essentially add the nicotine, add a lot of other things, and make it so harmful and deadly, number one. Number two, why is it so prevalent? I would argue because it's legal. It was accepted in Hollywood until the 1990s. I mean, it was accepted everywhere until then, if you think about it. And when you have something so accepted and prevalent, that makes the drug worse. Like this is really key. And I talk to this with my students and others. A drug's harmfulness is not just the biological nature of the drug. Okay, that's not the only part of harmfulness. The other part of the harmfulness of a drug is the acceptance and the prevalence of it, because you could have something extremely deadly, like one drop and you're dead. But if that's used by 1 out of every 1 billion people, okay, that's a less harmful drug to society, actually, and much less likely to use it than something that's half as harmful but used by 3 times as many people. In other words, the prevalence is a lot. So a lot of the fact that tobacco and cigarettes are harmful actually come from its legality. And in terms of its individual harm, cigarettes affect your lungs, and that's how they kill you, and your heart and other parts of your body, of course, but they don't affect your behavior. Okay, they don't affect your mind. In fact, I always say we don't want to tell kids the truth about cigarettes, which is that tobacco actually and nicotine maybe make you concentrate a little bit better. Of course, we would never want to promote that because we don't want kids smoking, obviously. Right. But when it comes to the mind, marijuana, there's no contest about marijuana's harmfulness to tobacco. When it comes to the lungs and other things, we know that tobacco, from what we know now, is certainly more deadly. So it's, comparing drugs, we have to be very careful about and very clear about when we do that. So thanks for indulging me on that answer.
Thank you much. And so I want to transition that piece about the acceptance and the lethality that comes along with the acceptance of a drug over to the social justice category you spoke of.
Yeah.
America has earned its reputation on mistreating people of color here,
Yes.
and I'm going to say it as politically correct as I can. In America. And so here we are seeing yet another industry
yes,
find itself in the communities of people of color.
Yeah.
And again, already vulnerable communities, disenfranchised, marginalized, all those things. So why not, or we'll just speak on that, and then we can kind of go a little bit further into that.
Well, obviously it's a very deep issue, and so it's hard to talk about it within a minute, but the reality is these are predatory industries that attack the least among the people that have least among us, the most disenfranchised. Okay, let's look at alcohol. Okay, where are the liquor stores? Are they in the upper class communities? Not usually. Where are the places to buy lottery, gambling, tobacco? Where are those places? They're usually in areas with people of color. And so there's a reason for that. The reason is these industries target these communities so that, because addiction, again, just like about drugs, is kind of an equation of harmfulness. Addiction is not just the drug you take. Addiction is your support network. Addiction is, whether you go into addiction has to do with your job prospects, your economic prospects, your family life. Again, your neighborhood and support network. If you fall off the saddle, is there a community to help put you back on the saddle? And unfortunately, they go to these disenfranchised and disempowered communities, these industries. And marijuana, that's exactly what they're doing. And they're promising riches. Oh my gosh, let me tell you, they go to Newark, New Jersey, Camden, and they say, oh my God, we're going to make everybody millionaires. Well, let me tell you something. The millionaires, they look a lot more like me than anybody else that I've seen. Okay. The millionaires from marijuana, they're not making money from marijuana from people of color. It's really a lie. And I actually highlight this in the book. I talked to two heroes as I talk about James and Charmaine, right? And James and Charmaine Hayes are community organizers in Compton, California, as I mentioned earlier. And they, push back against marijuana stores because they know it hurts their community. It doesn't give people hope. It doesn't give, better education. And so I absolutely think this is a social justice issue.
I would tend to agree with you on that. And the term predatorial, I think really, again, that strikes a chord, because again, you look at it from a business model standpoint, the chances of dismantling this type of business model we may not find much success. But when the groundswell comes from the community on predatorial practices, you have a tendency to move and behave a little bit differently. So to your knowledge, are there any national coalitions or community efforts that are happening that perhaps Broward County can join in? So again, the momentum and the groundswell could be have synergy in it.
Yeah, there's some things, the chapters of the NAACP, the local chapters, there are many of them that are pushing back against marijuana stores in their community. So I'm not sure if you all have partnered with them. They've actually been very helpful to us in places like Illinois and Detroit and other places. So I would see, maybe this is not even on their radar, but you can put it on their radar. I mean, that would be extremely helpful, because sometimes it's just completely not, there's so many other issues to deal with. Obviously, SAM as an organization, we want to help. We want to empower local communities. We want to partner with you all. Maybe we could talk about how to do that. Often different neighborhood groups are very concerned about just drugs in their community, and they know that putting pot shops in their community, it's not going to help. It's not going to be helping their community at all.
Right.
So I think there are some natural allies we can talk to.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know my coalition members are certainly taking
Good.
note. Let's just check the chat box and see what other questions we have. Again, the whole concept of the decriminalization for marijuana and the DUIs, and I guess the cross comparison between how we're handling marijuana and alcohol. Is there anything more you can add to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't have a good test for impairment is the bottom line. We have obviously the drug recognition expert officers. I don't think we're going to be able to have enough to handle this issue, to be honest with you. I mean, unless we had unlimited resources, but we of course know what's happening to departments around the country. So, I mean, the idea that we're going to have every drug recognition expert officer every time there's someone impaired driving, that's a very tall order. We don't have the technology as we do for alcohol. And THC is fat soluble, and it processes in different people's systems differently. Very, very difficult. It's a problem we have not figured out how to solve. And so the Coral Cohen is in the Q&A is correct. There are several considerations to be figured out, and it's very, very difficult to do because the nanograms per milliliter in your blood, I mean, that could just range such a dramatic range. So I think it's difficult to be able to talk about that issue right now. We don't have the technology yet at all.
My goodness, I tell you, in 2021, we don't have the technology, but you mentioned about the industry outpacing where we are. So
completely outpacing.
Oh, that's quite unfortunate. So again, we need to be thinking along those lines. I see some additional questions in the chat box about the CBD oil.
Yeah.
And
that's a good question.
I'm going to add to that question,
please,
so you can answer a couple of pieces. The CBD oil, the notion of marijuana being not addictive.
Right.
And then the notion of a person cannot overdose on marijuana. So if you can kind of tackle those medical ones together.
Sure. So let's talk first. I'll take the last ones first. So overdose, what is an overdose? Well, there's deadly overdose, fatal overdose, and then there's just overdose. Like you took too much and you have a bad reaction. We don't think there's fatal overdose from THC, and mainly because the reason you overdose is you have receptors in your brainstem that stop your breathing and stop your heart. Sadly, we have a lot of opioid receptors there. That's why opioids can do that. We don't have THC receptors there, thank God. So it can't do that. So that's correct. But you can have there are thousands of non-fatal overdoses every year, tens of thousands, where people go to the emergency room. There's probably about 500,000 people that go to the emergency room for hospital or more for hospital admissions related to marijuana. And I think there are a lot more. That's an old number too, because the numbers are bad. But basically, that is something that we're very, very concerned about, because you know, you have a psychotic break, you have to go, you're overdosing, you're freaking out. That is absolutely happening. But when people say you can't die from marijuana, that's like saying you can't die from cigarettes. You don't have a cigarette overdose. We don't have tobacco overdose either. You die from a long-term use of lung cancer. Now, long-term for some people is 3 years, for others is 30 years. Everyone's different. So we would never say that cigarettes aren't deadly just because they don't produce a fatal overdose. So that's the analogy I like on that one. CBD, I get asked about it all the time. My two-word answer to that, buyer beware. You don't know what you're getting. Maybe it's fine. It probably is okay. It's not going to do anything negative. But when the FDA tests some of these products that are out there, because it's a completely unregulated thing, it was legalized. If it's CBD from hemp, it's legal from a 2018 federal agricultural bill in the US Congress. And so there's no regulation on it. When the FDA has checked some of these products, they have very high levels of THC. Some of them, they have lead, they have all these things you would not want to ingest. So buyer beware. Also understand that CBD creams, for example, for joints or whatever, are very difficult to penetrate the skin, okay? So I think CBD is one of the latest and greatest placebos that we have, meaning a lot of people think it works, and that's why it works. And if that works for you, great. It's like putting sugar powder on your body too. I mean, like, it's good, like that, then maybe that's helpful for you. But I also say buyer beware.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. You mentioned Congress. I think in your last comment, talk to us about what are the feds doing?
Well, we know that President Biden, thankfully, is completely against the legalization of marijuana. We also know that some Senate progressives and others are in favor of it. We don't see marijuana laws changing on the federal level anytime soon, but we need people to speak up to their members, because a lot of members that are in DC, they just don't hear from us regarding this issue. They think nobody cares and that everybody wants it legalized because that's what they see on TV, or they see one poll or the other and they don't realize the poll's been funded by the marijuana industry. So they need to hear from you. They need to hear your thoughts as a private citizen. Obviously, you know, if you work for the state and get state funding, you have to be very careful in your official capacity. But as a private citizen, you can exercise your right of freedom of speech and to be able to basically express your concerns. You know, I am worried about the Banking Act, and I showed that video earlier. I am worried a little bit about that, but even that doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon. Right? It did before, but now it doesn't as much. So again, I would just say keep the pressure on. It's likely that your member, unless they are completely pro everything, and there are some that are, but it's very likely your member will be kind of surprised to hear from you, but will be relieved. I get that all the time. I get people sent from both sides of the aisle saying, you know, thanks for telling me that, because I needed that information, because I'm getting hounded on this, like by, you know, the same 10 people everywhere I go who care about this legalizing pot. And thank you for giving me this response or what. So there, you know, it's really good to be in touch with them about all of this.
Okay, very good. So again, some action items that we can certainly
Absolutely
take under consideration. So the medical marijuana card, we found that our young people and folks are using that to allow their ability to use it in more settings that would normally frown upon or not allow them.
Yes.
Even Lisa Segal, she asked a question early on about noticing some of her clients who are in the dependency system are gaining marijuana cards in order to continue their use of marijuana. And they're also using street marijuana. So kind of how does this work, and how can you separate it out, or what's your thoughts?
Well, it's very difficult because people can get a medical marijuana card for, you know, a headache. I mean, it's you can't separate out whether somebody's using it legitimately or illegitimately because of the same products. It's the same thing. It's not, people think that medical marijuana means it's some special formulation designed by a biofirm and approved by the FDA or something. It's nothing like that. So it's very difficult to suss out. I would be very skeptical if somebody with a history of substance use all of a sudden said they needed a medical marijuana card. Let's just put it that way. Okay. And a lot of them do.
Understood. So they kind of go hand in hand. So we have, I'm looking at many of our questions, and you actually covered so much ground along the way. If you had to give us as a professor, perhaps, if you had to give us homework, that you thought we should work on here in Broward County or in Florida, what would be some of those homework items that you would have us
Homework
do?
items, a few things. I'd say read the book. There's also the earlier book, Reefer Sanity, which I see a judge mentioned. Thank you so much. Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. I would research what your local officials, everyone from the very local level to your state officials that go to Washington, D.C., and your state reps, everyone in between, where they are on this issue. And I would essentially write a letter that's factual and let them know where your position is, and that if they have any questions on marijuana issues, you want to be a resource, because these folks need resources. I mean, you remember, elected officials are dealing with 10,000 different issues a day. They want resources. They want people they can go to, because they usually, an issue comes up and they have to respond quickly. They can't research it for a month. So they need people in the community that are experts on this. So I would reassert your expertise on this issue, and on obviously drug issues generally, which you already do, but on marijuana issues. And I would do some education in the community. It's hard during the pandemic, but town halls like this we can do virtually, and other things. But we need to keep that up, because I would start organizing people about because it's going to be coming down the pike, and I would start engaging with young people as well, and getting young people to often be the spokespeople, because they can be the best kinds.
Perfect, because I was thinking those homework assignments are great for the professionals, but certainly wanted to engage the young population who will probably have to lead this charge as time goes on. So
yes.
Anything outside of these action items, anything you would recommend specifically for our young people?
Well, I would recommend to be educators for your fellow young people, because your brains are being targeted by an industry that just sees dollar signs. And so I would say, understand that and lead with that when you talk to your friends, because if you lead with, oh, marijuana could reduce your IQ by 8 points, they may not care. But if you lead with, are you really going to support a multinational corporate industry that's trying to trick us into believing that this is good for us? You'll get a really interesting reaction when you say that. So I think there are some of those tactics you can use, and you can use all of our materials. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know.
Thank you, because that's what I was going to ask. Does Sam have a portion on his website that's
we do
geared specifically for youth?
Yes, we have a lot of stuff about youth and people in recovery, young people in recovery, young people trying to do prevention. Absolutely.
Perfect. Very good. Well, I have been so educated on this topic, and this is not the marijuana of yesterday. So certainly we need to be more educated and more assertive in our quest to eradicate this process. And again, the misinformation and the marketing is, I think, bombarding us. So I'm going to pause here, because I want to bring back on Jenna and Angela from United Way for some closing remarks. And what I want to say, thank you so very much for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
As a representative from the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, the largest single state-run juvenile justice system in the country, we certainly see the challenges of substance abuse and the long-term effects on our clientele, as well as the families we serve. And so we want to do better. And so we look forward to the charge ahead on this issue. Again, Broward Behavioral Health, along with United Way, have done a phenomenal job, as always, with keeping us in the know with the cutting edge information and bringing the experts to us. So again, your time is certainly appreciated here with us. And so again, Angela and Jenna, you want to come back on and bring a closing remarks?
I cannot thank everyone enough, especially everyone for being on this whole time. Thank you to all the panelists who put this together. I don't know about you, but I feel like I learned so much. We still have so many more questions, but this is really just the beginning. Besides looking at the SAM website, which I put in the chat, feel free also to really look up. We have our Prevention Resource Center. And we want to continue these important conversations with parents, with youth, with our other agencies, especially in Broward County. One thing, the Youth Action Team, this is one of our main topics that we go into as well. Youth Action Team meets the first Thursday of every month from 9:30 to 11 a.m. Our goal is to work to reduce marijuana, alcohol, and other drug use in Broward County by youth. And we also incorporate Break the Vape this year, again, to help combat the youth vaping epidemic. And we want to continue furthering our partnerships. Our next meeting is December 2nd at 9:30. So I invite many of you, if you would like to join as well. I know we all have several more questions I still see in the Q&A. And to answer another question, that yes, this will be this is recording, and it will be posted on YouTube and on our website in the future. Angela, did you want to have any closing remarks?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jana. Thank you, Cassandra. And thank you, Dr. Kevin Sabet, for all your research, for everything that you do for the community. And of course, we're going to invite you again. We are actually thinking about a panel with the youth. I think that is the next step, and it's going to probably happen pretty soon. So
Great.
we'll be calling you.
Please do.
We have youth leadership here in this community, and they actually work on their institute once a year. So I think they are so well prepared. They have been doing talks about different topics. So we would be honored to have you with the kids, and probably in a live
I'd love it.
event, right?
I love it.
I think that would be great. So thank you again. Thank you all. We will be sending you guys more information on an email, and we're very excited about this opportunity. So I don't know if Dr. Kevin Sabet, do you have any more closing remarks? Or?
Sure. Listen, it was a pleasure to be with all of you. I appreciate all the questions, including the tough ones. That's what makes us better. This is an ongoing issue. This is not something that is just going to end tomorrow or something. This is we're doing this to protect our next generation. We're doing this so that we can live with hope, and that's what we have to offer. We're offering hope. We don't want to stigmatize people. We don't want to criminalize them, but we also don't want to offer them a life that's not worth living. And so we want to offer hope. And so I want to thank you all for having me. I love working with you guys, and absolutely, I'd love to get down to Broward County. That'd be fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.
All.
Thank you.
All right, stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.